we started this interview because of this major milestone, which is the 80th anniversary of Adolfson and Peterson. So when you two look back at the company's journey from George Adolfson arriving in the US with the famous $40 in his pocket to today where you surpass the $2 billion revenue, what stands out as some of the defining moments that have shaped the company into what we see today?
Do you want to start, Scott?
Sure. I think that it's actually very fun for us to, as a family, to have the stories that have been told throughout our history, and also both Andra and myself, being third generation, we've actually been able to grow up with George and Maya Adolfson, which was really very special. So we spent quite a few years with them, a lot of time with them. So that was really something that was very memorable for myself and many of the family. So we were able to retain a lot of the oral tradition of what we heard it was like. So that was great. And also George, for many years, he would have the opportunity for every one of his children and grandchildren to work for the firm.
Yep. And I would jump onto that, Scott, and say, not only did we spend our childhoods with them, they also had a family farm. And so we spent a lot of time on the farm as children. But we also, all of us, or you and I for sure, grew up working for the company. So we grew up with Adolfson and Peterson. Our parents worked there. We went as small children. We worked there through high school and college and beyond. So we both have a long tradition working for the family business, which has been a blessing. I mean, the great thing about family business is it oftentimes unites families. They get to know each other better than maybe they would otherwise. The other thing is, well, at some point I want to talk about my grandmother because she doesn't always get a lot of airtime, and she's really kind of the magic behind all of this story. So we'll wait until later in the questions, but I'd like to bring up Maya Adolfson too.
We are thinking of her today in this interview. Can you think of perhaps industry-related defining moments for the company?
Well, I can think of quite a few over the years. Certainly, the very start was a defining moment when George Adolfson met Gordy Peterson, and that was 1946. And they decided that Gordy had just gotten out of the Navy as a naval engineer, and George was a traveling bricklayer that was working in the Twin City area. And the connection was made actually by George Adolfson's, Maya Adolfson's, how was the tie there? I guess it was our great uncle Arthur, that was working at a lumber yard, put Gordy Peterson in touch with George Adolfson. So that was the start. Then they started with homes in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and very quickly moved to doing commercial work in the 50s. And so by the mid-50s, we were seeing records that showed that they were building K-12 schools, University of Minnesota work, a lot of government buildings as well. And that carried through to the 60s. And then in 1979, George Adolfson and the Adolfson family made the decision to purchase Gordy Peterson's interest. So it became 100% owned by the Adolfson family. It was also about that time that David Adolfson stepped in as the president and led the company then through another entire generation of growth into different markets and different regions, becoming not just a Midwest firm, but a firm that was doing work literally from coast to coast. Andra, you have some things to add on that?
Yeah, Scott, you're the great kind of family history archivist, so you have all of that. We're also simultaneously writing with an author of the story of the family and the company right now. So Scott's been reading all of the copy and proofreading. So he's got his dates pretty front of mind. I think another, as you alluded to, important kind of transition was all of the expansion starting in 1980 with Colorado, and then Dallas, and then Arizona, and other parts of the country. I think that kind of expansionist mindset was important. And I think we were, for the Midwest region, we were one of the first general contractors to open offices in other parts of the country. So that was really, I think, visionary to be looking beyond the Midwest and looking to expand into other markets that early.
And speaking of that expansion, how did the company expand beyond Minneapolis into multiple states, and again cross the $2 billion revenue mark without losing its identity and initial goals, would you say?
That's such an interesting thought. I think about it all the time. I think our early expansion, which a lot of early expansion for companies is kind of an entrepreneurial model. You pick a good market, you hire the best local talent, and then in some ways you let them, do what they do best. And we did that for quite a few years, but then you get to be a certain size and scale and you need to start standardizing, and there needs to be some kind of commonality. You might have a client who we work with nationally and they need to, see branding or see systems and processes that are standardized between offices. So that happened later, which I think is very common to expand that way. Am I right in thinking that, Scott?
Oh, I think that's a great summary. What we would do is when we were going into a new market, we recognize and just new areas even in general, we would recognize that we needed to have a good, strong individual that knew the office process and procedures, as well as that individual that would know the field procedures as far as the actual construction. So we'd have two key employees that we'd identify very early on. And that's really how we expanded and grew and were successful in our markets. In addition, we would have clients that would take us to new areas. And again, the leadership of AP was willing to say yes when a client asked us to move to a new market or a new geographic area to do work for them. I think also we identified, it was in the 90s that we sat down and really identified when with AP when it was growing too, that the executive leadership at the time and the family identified what our core values were. And we had a little acronym that we made up that stays true to this day that says "We care." We care,
exactly. I read that.
Yep. And so it's work hard, it's enthusiasm, it's creativity, absolute integrity. It was the respect. And then the last E, we couldn't quite figure out how to get that fit in, and it was enjoy life we came up with. And that explains.
That's a good acronym.
Yeah, it explains George and Gordy and the entire family and our employees.
Moving on, I'd like to ask Andra, how do you balance honoring legacy and making decisions that push the company forward at the same time?
That's an interesting question. I guess I haven't really thought about it. I think as a longer term employee and somebody who's part of the family, definitely my coworkers come to me for, kind of history of the family and the company and context, perhaps. They always want to know about my grandparents and my parents and aunts and uncles and family members. Oftentimes a new employee, I'll sit down and go through the family tree, for example. So I'm kind of the person who resides in this office who's a keeper of a lot of that history, and Scott was for certain when he was working for the company too. And I I see a lot of threads. And I always say, you know, we're still a family business. The DNA of that original small group in the early years is still here. We're designing this new office building, and my grandmother and grandfather felt very strongly about providing lunch for employees in the early days, and we had a cook come in and make lunch for everybody, and that kind of hospitality and community was really important, and it still happens today. I'll walk through the lunchroom and there's a table full of people and they're having great, very diverse conversations and enjoying each other's company, and that same spirit of knowing each other, eating together, it's very joyful, and that stays. That's been in the company for 80 years, and it's still around. And so we went from, you know, obviously a smaller company to a really much larger company, but there's through lines that I recognize because I've been here long enough, and that's one of them. And so when we're planning our new space, they want a giant table because. And the great thing about it is all the folks who are having lunch could sit at different tables, but they don't. They fill this giant central table and they eat together every day. And it's really fun I don't always have time to sit and have lunch with them, but it's fun to listen to their conversations. They clearly know each other really well, and it's a whole different way of knowing a coworker. It's just sit down and share a meal.
Say, Andra, also,
I agree.
Andra, also touch on, you're really the keeper of the keys when it comes to Maya, to Grandma Adolfson, as far as the stories with her. And so we've really looked to both George and Maya. They were the team.
Yeah. Yeah, I just don't think the company would have started without Maya. They were a team and a partnership. And in a traditionally male-dominated industry, oftentimes you talk about all the men in the business, but she really was integral. She supported him. I think it was her idea initially to start a company. She did the accounting and bookkeeping early on. It just is it was a great partnership and union, and the company wouldn't be here today if it weren't for our grandmother as well.
And I have a similar question for Scott, and also going back to the initial story of the founding of the company. Scott, how has this early story of George Adolfson coming to America influenced the culture and decision making at AP today?
Well, I think that for myself, it was really the opportunity to work with him all the years that he was living with us and with us here on Earth. And so, you know, we had many of our, as I said earlier, many of our family members had opportunities to work with him. I worked with him on his farm that he had when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. Started working in the construction as well when I was 16, 17. And so it got to work not just with him, but then also we would have, say, annual meetings. And it was fun to actually, at the annual meetings, we would have our retired employees attend those as well. And I was able to actually meet people that would be, say, the first person that George had hired, the first labor, and people that I worked with in all the years in the field that had been hired by him, and that they remembered the company from its early years. So they would tell stories of what it was like in the 50s and 60s. And so that was really a huge plus for not just myself, but other of our cousins as well. And then, of course, the five second generation that were able to remember and hear this. So that really was foundational for carrying forward just what AP still stands for today.
So you were just meeting and absorbing all these stories and knowledge. And
well, and of course, you know, he'd be out there directing the work too. So you had to be working. That was that working hard part that he was expecting you to be doing what he thought you should be, and working harder than those people beside you because you were family.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, Scott, you brought up an interesting thing, which I would say is also kind of part of that DNA of the company that exists today. We've always welcomed multi-generation members of families to work for the company. So I work with several people whose fathers worked here, their uncles, their brothers, and now their children work here. And that is traditional. We've always encouraged it, and it still happens today.
And you'd say that's one of the, how should I put it? One of the key to AP's success today.
So I think we're a family business. We value family, and I think that just carries over into, you know, if somebody works for us, we're certainly willing to hire their children, or, you know, I mean, that's just been traditional, but I think that probably links to being a family business, just placing high value in family.
All right. Just to go in a industry related section of this interview, how, and just this is a big shift from what we've discussed so far. How would you describe the development landscape in Minneapolis at the moment? Where would you say are its weak points, and also where would you say are its local opportunities?
Oh my.
God,
You want to tackle that first,
like
Andra, or should I?
Well, you go first. I work in mostly public work, so government work, municipal, city, county, state, and I can speak a little bit about that. I work less with developers, so I'm not as qualified to speak to that.
Well, that's kind of an interesting question, because we, and I'll speak more broadly to each one of our regional areas that we work in, because each one is a little bit unique as far as the types of work we pursue and follow. However, the overall umbrella, about 85% of our work is either repeat work or what we call in our industry negotiated work, meaning that it's not just a price that we're putting out there and we're selected only on that low price, but we're selected on what we bring to the table for that client and owner, for the skills to complete the work and the quality of the workmanship as well. And so, boy, when you talk about specific markets, for example, the Midwest right now, we certainly, actually nationwide, the office sector and the office building market is really very slow and very tight. You're just not seeing a lot of, and that's, you know what, that's just public knowledge. Almost anybody in the industry would recognize that. It's interesting, though, that we are seeing, for example, in the Midwest and in the mountain states, we're seeing a lot of the K-12 work, maybe not necessarily new startup projects as far as schools, but we're certainly seeing a lot of renovations and going in and change where the actual instruction is changing and the process of teaching students is changing. So they need to change the physical space to adapt to that. And so we certainly are seeing a lot of that type of work right now. We also are seeing a fair amount of what we call higher ed, which is university and private school type work. And we're seeing a fair amount of that work nationwide as well, where the educational market and the university and college systems are again adapting to a whole new set of students that are doing much more online and much more remote. So they're not on campus each and every day. And so we are seeing that also. Municipal work, that's slowing down a bit right now as the economy slows a bit. However, we are seeing some private sectors that are moving forward. For example, the wastewater and water treatment plant work. We're seeing that throughout a number of different states, that both private clients that we have and also municipalities are upgrading their wastewater and water treatment. What they call the PFAS chemicals, the forever chemicals, figuring out how to deal with those, for example. So that's a few of the sectors. And then, of course, you can't talk construction these days without also thinking of the data centers and the energy sectors right now. And we've been very fortunate to be able to do several data centers and have several underway right now as well. So that's one market that's rapidly growing. And as any sector within our industry, we'll just watch and see when that boom slows down. But we have been very successful with having team members that have been able to adapt and work with that type of work.
Scott, I think I would add to that a couple of things. We are definitely doing some industrial work, and we have a couple of Fortune 500 clients who we've worked with for decades, and a lot of the work we do for them, we can't talk about. We sign NDAs, but we've been continuously working with them over the past few years. And for office, for a market that's cooled off, we've had some interesting office projects, and a lot of it related to the pandemic and how people work and where they work. So kind of big retrofits to consolidating several buildings into one, perhaps. I'm thinking of one in St. Paul, which is a product of that, and another one, which is a new office building where the client, all of their employees, for the most part, had been working dispersed for decades, and they'd never had their own office building, and so we just built them a new office building. So we've done several office projects in the Midwest recently for a market that's slowed down. They're related to, for sure, the pandemic and how people work, and maybe needing less office space and consolidating, or just catering to hybrid work. But I would say we're doing a lot of industrial work.
You know, Andra, that reminds me too. For example, like in the Dallas market, we're seeing, and we've done now several office towers that have been converted to either partial or completely residential. That's kind of intriguing to see, where a office tower in the downtown market has been converted either in whole or in part to residential as this economy changes.
I agree. Also, I couldn't help but notice when I was doing my research on AP, and you mentioned briefly earlier, Scott, how AP has built a strong safety record over the years, which I thought was really impressive and interesting. Could you both tell us a bit about the specific practices or systems AP has put in place on job sites that have made a big difference in reducing incidents?
Andra, you want to start, or should I?
Well, I mean, we can talk about the culturally, it's so important for us. I mean, it just always has been. And if you work here, we start many of our meetings with a safety moment where we're talking about. Sorry, I'm trying to find something. We'll have somebody will start the meeting with just a conversation around safety, and it might relate to the meeting. It might be, how do we exit the building? Where is the local kind of closest defibrillator, for example? It's so embedded in our culture that is usually one of the first topics that we talk about in any context or any meeting, for sure.
And that actually is right from the board level. When we have board meetings, the very first thing we do is a safety moment, and someone shares something that they recognize is a potential safety concern or issue with the time of the year, or it could be where we're located. But that comes from the very top. Every meeting we start. In addition, to add a bit more on that, we every day have pre-task planning that takes place on all of our sites. So that means that before the jobs start, not just our workforce, we have about 900 people right now, but also the subcontractors. They're expected to have a pre-task plan for the work that they're going to be performing that day with their employees that are on the site. That gets turned into our superintendent and our project team so that we know that it's being done. We also are very focused on tracking and watching carefully, not just a injury that would be what we'd call a lost time in the industry, where it might be more than a couple days, or a first aid where you've got to go in and fix a finger, or you've got a possible skin knee or something. But also, we go in and make sure that, and we work hard to have our employees and our subcontractor members report what they see as possible injury causing situations, the near misses, we call them. And so our safety culture really is very focused on making sure that everyone on the site, and that goes for any of us visiting the site as well, for example, myself, that we watch carefully. And if we see something, hey, we expect the workers to speak up. We've had situations where workers have actually, been able to close the job down and shut it down because it's just a situation that is considered so unsafe that we have to deal with a potential injury-causing situation or incident that anyone on the site has the authority to do this.
Right. Yeah, that's the one thing I was going to add. And that's a hard thing to really achieve, that it's, a space where we're so serious about the safety culture that everybody and anybody, if they see something they feel unsafe, they can say something, that, you really, I think, kind of achieved a real safety culture when people feel like they're empowered to do that.
And also, again, looking at your vast portfolio, I saw it spans everything from healthcare to schools to hospitality, industrial. And I also wanted to ask you, how important is diversification for a contractor, especially in a market where certain sectors can slow down quickly?
I can start us off with that because I kind of lived through it. Actually, maybe you lived through it too, Scott. During the 2008, 2009 kind of downturn, we had offices all over the country, and the downturn in the economy impacted those offices at different times. And so having just that diversity of being in different regions was just a huge benefit to the company. I remember our Colorado, our Wyoming offices, Texas offices, they seemed to be more resilient to that global crisis, financial crisis. And if they felt the downturn, it seemed to be later than the rest of us. And I remember thinking at that time, the being in different markets in the country, and then also being just in different markets in each region, I'm definitely a believer in diversification. For example, in that market, I wouldn't have wanted to be just doing multifamily housing, for example. I felt like we were protected because we were so diverse.
And then also, it's not necessarily even within our industry, there's different sectors. You've probably heard us talking about this. And so when we say K-12 or kindergarten through 12th grade, or hospitality or healthcare. But in addition, one thing that's really been able to set us apart is that when we have a client that comes to us with a unique project or a unique situation, we really are in a mode where we don't say no. We sit down and figure out how we're going to do this project. And we've done some just incredible projects over the years. And that's part of the pride that our 900 employees have, is being able to look at a job or a project that they've done that they know is incredibly unique. We did a laboratory for the University of Minnesota up in very close to the boundary waters in northern Minnesota, where it was basically a football field that was blasted out of bedrock 80 feet deep, and they built an entire laboratory there to study the subatomic particles, neutrinos, and they had to shield it and shelter it from the sun's rays, which were generated in those as well. So, I mean, that's an example. We've got the Marathon Oil building down in Dallas that was a historic rehab. And that was one of the first projects, large projects we did in Dallas. And a client took us and asked if we were willing to really tackle, this type of really very important, very difficult project to execute. And we certainly said yes. So, we can just think over and over again, we can think of projects like these examples that we would look to our employees. We'd pull the team together and say, okay, superintendent, project manager, foreman, what do you think? Just can we perform this project? And we'd run with what they would say.
I would jump on the back of that, Scott, and say there's always a willingness to pursue a challenging project. And, from a logistics standpoint, from a location standpoint, from just the project is challenging, like this NOVA fire detector project that Scott was referring to with the University of Minnesota and Fermilab, that had tons of challenges. And we work with people who really love a challenge. The project manager for that project, to this day says that was the most challenging project he'd ever worked on, but also the most rewarding. And that's just the general attitude. So, which is great from I'm in business development. And so I oftentimes will look for really challenging projects because I know that we execute them well. And we're not afraid to travel, and we're not afraid to go to very remote parts of the country to do work.
And that's part of our history again. That goes right back to George Adolfson and Gordy Peterson. George figured out early on in the 50s how to create shelters so that the masons could work year-round, which had never not been done in the Midwest. When the snow flew and the cold hit, normally the jobs would shut down. Well, he figured out a way to create the shelters where people worked year-round. We put that in place then when we went to Denver and worked in the mountains in the early 80s. Again, projects that used to shut down in the mountains, we would work throughout the entire year. And so and I can just think we did a UPS facility years ago, and it had an interesting 35-degree slope in the walls where all the conveyor systems were going to be working below grade or below ground. And we had one of our foremen determine how to actually finish and pour that concrete at that 35-degree angle. We have another job that we did only a few years back where we figured out how to make we had a 30-some story tower. We figured out how to make a floor pour every 3 days. So every 3-day cycle, we went up one floor, which just took months off the actual completion of this project for the client. So it's fun to see and hear what our teams are still doing. They still create the stories today.
That's really interesting. And relating to that, with projects that are so different and ranging from 50,000 to 400,000 square feet, what are the biggest labor or subcontractor challenges you're facing today, and how do they impact timelines on large civic buildings, let's say?
I mean, I can speak in general, and then Scott, you probably can speak more specifically. Scott has always had a connection to the labor unions, so he can get into more detail. I just think in general, particularly in the field, everybody's competing to hire the best talent. I think for a piece of time, the world was promoting, 4-year college degree, which we're certainly well behind education advanced degrees, but I think maybe the trades weren't as commonly promoted in maybe high school.
Yes.
And so I think we see a dip in terms of the demographics with just fewer people who went into the trades. So then there's just fewer people, you know, kind of mid-career or later right now to hire. So it's very competitive.
Yes.
And I believe that's a demographic situation. It's improving. There's a lot of outreach and interface right now in the you know, with the unions and trades in the high schools. And trade schools in this part of the country are full with students.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a career path that many people are considering now. I just think there was a dip. And we've definitely felt that in terms of amount of people who were in the trades.
Yeah, we're certainly concerned about what the entire industry recognizes, that we do not have enough people moving into the industry. Some of the ways that we've been addressing that, Andra's touched on as well. We certainly have internal training where we have a more experienced, say, carpenter that takes an apprentice carpenter or a first year individual under their wing, so he or she can really understand the trade and the craft and learn how to work safely. We look to high schools. We work with high schools in a number of different areas around the country with their programs as well, so that we can have students understand the industry. We also find that many people, and then we also have internships with the university systems and with a number of the construction management engineering programs throughout the country. So we're very focused on having interns that work for us for the summer, not just one summer, but we would like to see them come back even, you know, their sophomore, their junior, their senior years and work with us. And they're the best advocates of not just AP, but also the industry if they have an incredible experience over that 3 months in the summer when they're working. So we work hard with that. We're very active when it comes to industry events and supporting industry associations that focus on bringing labor into the marketplace as well. So the Associated Builders and Contractors, the ABC, and then also the Associated General Contractors, AGC, for example, both of those organizations. So it's a continual process and also a continual awareness for our employees themselves and our leaders within the company to help mentor people and keep them within the industry.
And just because we don't have a lot of time left, and also I really want to ask this question before we finish. And going back to my first question and the reason we're speaking today, the main reason, just looking back on these 80 years of AP, how would each of you, how do you see the next decade looking like for AP? Looking at the industry as well, so if there are specific markets, project types, or innovations that the company is looking into, but also you personally, how you see AP evolving.
Boy,
That's a hard thing to do.
You could talk
it,
for an
to look
hour on
forward.
that one, right?
I know. Yeah. The other thing we didn't mention, but we've got a history and tradition of being very early adopters of technology, which I would imagine will continue. Can I envision what that will be? No, but we've always been an early adopter of whatever technology was emerging in our industry. So I would imagine that continues. I like to think that the culture of the company and what makes us unique and different will remain. Even as we grow to be a larger company, people work here because they like the people and they like the culture. And so I think that because that's the case, that's valued, and it will hopefully stay as part of the AP experience.
Yep, I think that, yeah, I think change is continuous. And you look at, for example, the latest buzzword, which is the artificial intelligence, the AI. Well, that's really, when you reflect on it, handling huge volumes of data, the way that it's being done now. That's something we've looked at for many years. We don't want to be so far out ahead that we're the ones falling on our sword, so to speak, and not succeeding with it. But we certainly want to be using those tools as rapidly as we possibly can. And we have teams that are internal working on that now. So it's changes, just like I said, it's going to continue to happen. And our industry, it's exciting because we are in an industry that continually changes. I can't think of one. Where else would you work yourself out of a job every 18 to 24 months?
Do you think the other thing, Scott, is we've always kind of had an expansionist mindset? I think I could see us in more regions, and we have kind of a main office in a region, and then we have kind of satellite offices. I could see that the future, including that kind of expansion. It's hard to envision the future, isn't it? Yeah, it's easy to look back. It's hard to envision what might be.
Well, and then also we've set ourselves up too for success. I feel that with the ownership of the firm, it's gone down from the first to the second. The second now has worked very hard to transfer this down to the third, fourth, and now the fifth as well. So we're down 5 generations as far as ownership. We have 56 family members, plus probably a few extra even now, or a few more, I should say. And so we just keep on expanding and recognize just how to pass down through gifting and through the planning that we have for our future generations to grab hold and run with this as well.
And I should say, I don't know how familiar you are with family business, Maria, but a 5th generation family firm is a rarity. It's a very small percentage of them that survive. So we certainly can be proud of that. And we've set the company up, I think, for success in that regard. And Scott was part of that establishment. We're structured more like a publicly held company than a privately held company.
We say we're a quasi-public firm. We have 8 directors. 5 of those directors are leaders in the business world outside of our family. I mean, they're outside directors, and we have 3 family members that sit on the board. In addition to, it's set up so we have 2 family observers with each of our quarterly board meetings, so that, again, those 4th generation in particular can attend a board meeting and understand and see what takes place even before they're in that decision-making mode.
Yeah.
And we also have an outsider non-family a CEO.
Yes.
I could see in the future more family entering the company. I'm on the 3rd generation is kind of starting to retire, but 4th generation is starting to join the company.
I am hopeful for you that happens.
It's exciting. I want that. I want family members to work for the company. I want to be part of a family business where family works for the company. I think that's important.
Yep, for sure.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you so much, Maria. We enjoyed it too.
Yep, very much so. Yeah, always interesting to be able to reflect back and look forward.
Yes.
Wonderful opportunity to be able to talk about.
And again, 80 years. Happy birthday, AP. Congratulations to all of you.
Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you so much.